When you're filming, one of the most important things that you need to get right is your exposure. And there are a lot of different tools out there that will help you get your exposure right. Now, one thing that I like to do, especially when shooting log, is I like to overexpose, not blow things out. I don't want the highlights to clip. I don't want to go past 100% if I can help it. Certain situations, you kind of have to let things blow out sometimes. Specular highlights, the sun, really, really bright highlights sometimes just have to go. But if you can overexpose without blowing out your highlights, that's what I personally like to do, and there's a good reason for that. When you overexpose, whether it's on a GH4 or an A7S or an Ursa Mini, it doesn't really matter. Whenever you overexpose, what that allows you to do is in post-production, you can pull that information back down. So you shot it overexposed, so it clearly looks too bright. You bring it back down, and when you bring everything down to the proper exposure level, what that does is all that noise that was captured up here goes down even further. This has been a technique used in Hollywood for a very, very long time. You want to overexpose without blowing out your highlights and then pull everything down. That way you get really clean shadows and everything is still exposed properly, but because it was shot over, all that noise goes down. If you don't understand that concept already, you can go look up some other stuff about it, because I feel like it's pretty common knowledge that a lot of people do. Now, the thing that you have to keep in mind when you do this is that if you overexpose when you shoot and you bring it back down to like a regular exposure, it can be very easy to still have it overexposed. And what I mean by that is you might be going for a certain look, like a cinematic look is what I would call it. Although there are so many different types of movies, I don't even want to get into like the film look or cinema look, what that means. People will say you need certain LUTs, you need to do certain things certain ways. There are a lot of things that make things look cinematic, and very few of them have to do with what camera you shot with or what LUT you use. It's a lot of different stuff, but those are kind of the smaller ones. I would say it's down to lighting, it's down to movement, it's down to direction, it's down to composition, it's down to locations and actors, and there's so many things that give your film a film look or cinematic look. But let's focus purely on exposure right now. When you pull something down, so we shot it overexposed, we pull it down to proper exposure, that can still be overexposed for the project. And in general, I actually like to go a little bit underexposed. And the reason I like to do that is when you look at images that are slightly underexposed in the post-production process, not in the filming acquisition process, but in post-production, when it's graded down, things tend to look a little bit more cinematic. Skin tones, when they're not super bright, tend to look more filmic. When you watch commercials or films or TV shows that have a cinema aesthetic, they tend to be darker in tone, both narratively sometimes and also visually, while things that are brighter and more well-lit tend to be more in that kind of commercial or sitcom realm where things are bright and lively and hey, isn't it a happy day? Wouldn't you want to buy this product? That realm. So when you're shooting overexposed and you grade down, you're starting with a very high threshold with all your color information. You're pulling it down, so that adjustment, it can be very easy in that movement to be like, oh, that looks good, I like it. But if you come back later or review it later, it might still be too bright than you actually want it. And it does matter on, what you're shooting does matter and does factor into it. If you're shooting a sitcom, a comedy for television, then yeah, you don't want it dark and super moody. But other times when you're shooting something and you want it to feel more cinematic, having those darker tones can be really helpful. Often in Hollywood, they'll shoot nighttime scenes very, very well lit. They'll be very bright, and then they grade it super dark, and they push it down to where it looks really dark, and you're looking in the shadows. And what you can do in those situations is you can retain a lot of that shadow information. So when you're pushing your color grade down, you don't have to clip all the blacks at the bottom. You don't have to blow everything out past zero. You can keep stuff in that bottom of the waveform, and you can have stuff down there to where you can see in the shadows, but it's not super clear. And what that does, thank you, phone. What that does is it allows your image just to take on more of that cinematic tone. It could totally be a stylistic thing that nowadays that's just the way to do it. But I think me personally, my own eyes, the way I see it, things that are darker tend to have more of that filmic look and feel. so many other different factors at play there too. It's not just about the exposure, but exposure can definitely help turn your images from something that looks like cheap video to something that's like, oh, that's really pleasing to look at. I like the way that looks. That looks somewhat cinematic. Now, the reason this is so important is because now when everyone's telling you to shoot overexposed and shoot brighter without blowing out your highlights, I'm seeing people that aren't pushing their grades as far as they probably could. They could come down with their exposure, be a little bit darker in the post-production grade. You definitely don't want to do it on set, because if you film something underexposed, well, then you might want to bring it up in post-production, and then all that noise comes with it. So when you're shooting on set, me personally, what I like to do currently, maybe this will change, I don't know, but currently my current process is try and shoot as bright as I can without blowing anything out, and then grading that down kind of below what some people might consider like ideal exposure. Without, I don't want to clip any of the highlights, I don't want to clip any of the blacks, I want to keep it nice and right, full waveform, but towards the bottom. That's kind of what I like to see. It just looks a little bit nicer to me. I don't know. Maybe you have a totally different perspective, but this is something I've just been kind of playing with lately and experimenting with, and I think that I am liking the results more and more. The more I do it, the more comfortable I am doing it and appreciating the look that it ends up giving me, compared to something like shooting it under, which I would hardly ever recommend. If you're doing a nighttime scene and you're not using lights, that's probably a bad thing. Next time you're out doing something that's supposed to be night, actually light it. Now, there are certain ways to light it, which I'm not going to go into in this video, but you can look up, lighting techniques for at night, and you want to bring that exposure up. Very classic example of this is someone around a fire pit at nighttime. They're very dark, the fire's incredibly bright, and there's this huge contrast ratio between their exposure and the fire just looks like white. It's like just white flames. You can actually compensate for that if you actually light your scene, bring the ambient light levels up, so now that fire and the ambient are a little bit closer in terms of exposure, and you can get some of that detail in the fire, and you have detail in the shadows, but it still looks like nighttime. So there's some things you can do, play around with it, test it out yourself and see what you find. But if you've been, grading your overexposed stuff and pulling it down to proper exposure, you might want to just play around, push it a little darker than you might be used to. You might be surprised with the results.